Welcome to Beyond the B, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy Allison and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lyft Economy, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Emmy Allison. Hey, Emmy.
Hey!
So we are joined today by Raj Aggarwal. Raj Aggarwal is the founder of Provoc, a communications firm whose vision is a world transformed by equity, beauty, and love. With over 20 years of experience as a communications and technology strategist, he has led internal and external branding, marketing, and customer engagement efforts for more than 450 nonprofits and social impact firms. Raj actively helps to shift organizations into a space of compassion and equity. Raj keeps Provoc rooted in empathy-driven work by forging partnerships with values-aligned, visionary leaders committed to social, economic, and racial justice. He has led workshops and talks at dozens of national conferences and continues to play a pivotal role in leading movements, communities, and organizations to be more equitable, inclusive, and aware of personal biases and prejudices. As a lifelong Washingtonian, Raj is deeply rooted in the local community. He serves on the boards of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, Ram Dass's Love, Serve, Remember Foundation, Fresh Farm DC, Climate Access, and the Ben's Chili Bowl Foundation, and has served on the boards of NTEN, Washington DC Economic Partnership, and he's also the proud recipient of B Lab's inaugural Anti-Racism and JEDI Impact Award. And you can learn more about Raj's personal story on NPR. Raj, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Emmy.
I didn't know there was a B Lab inaugural Anti-Racism and JEDI Impact Award. Let's see. Oh, yeah. For folks who are listening, they can't see, but he's got it. He's got it in his hands. It's a real thing.
Fancy.
I keep it on my desk. I was presented it by the wonderful Dr. Alonda Green. And the only reason, I did a lot of work there, but the year before, or maybe 2 years before that, Venice Dunn and I both received an award. But that award was for Venice. It wasn't for me. But they let me stand up there next to her.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, just to frame this conversation up for the listeners, so the questions we're going to ask and speak with Raj about reflect a range of feedback we've heard from B Corps around the US and Canada. And just so folks know, that these sort of thoughts and feedback don't necessarily represent the views of the majority of B Corps in the movement, and nor do we, so Ryan and Emmy, personally endorse or reject any specific perspective. That said, we believe the strength of the B Corp community lies in its diversity of geography, ideology, lived experience, and approach to change. We don't think it's helpful to pretend that everyone agrees with B Lab's current strategies or priorities, especially in today's political climate. We see deep value in making space for honest, respectful, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. So that's why we started this podcast, to explore the questions in the margins, the ones that don't always get airtime, but are essential to a thriving and evolving movement. So Raj, thanks again for joining us. And maybe so folks can get a bit about your background, how did you first get into the work you're doing today at Provoc?
I started my business a long time ago. The main reason was I just felt I really enjoyed doing graphic design at the time while I was in college. I met up with this guy that was a printer. And I was like, I can make a vocation out of this. I can figure this thing out. I'm just going to run my own business. Years later, I'm sure I was inspired by the fact that my dad was an entrepreneur. And I was surrounded, that was just actually being an entrepreneur is in our family lineage. We have a caste system in India, and we're Baniya, and Baniya are merchants. So I'm a merchant. Most recently, I took my now wife to India. And when we were sitting at my family's store, my uncle told us that we have been sitting at that same spot in this little store in Hoshiarpur, India, for over 150 years. Yeah, so over time, you start to realize like certain things are in your blood. I've always been an entrepreneur in the past for both illegal and legal activities. And so always been hawking something, man.
Love it.
And then as far as this work goes, yeah, I mean, it's just been a long journey of trying to be a communications creative agency in the world of capitalism and trying to center racial equity. And I would say that it was 2015, 2016 or so. We finally, as a firm, had some resources where we could pay someone else to figure some stuff out for us. And I brought in this consultant and they helped us to say, what is the most important work that we can do? And we decided that the most important work that we could do as communication strategists was to dismantle systemic racism. But we really didn't even know what that meant. And a month later, we got an RFP from this wonderful organization called Race Forward. And we got to spend the next 2.5 years with them learning from luminaries in the racial equity movement, people like John Powell and Julie Nelson. And in the meanwhile, we helped them build their capacity around doing communications, and it's led to almost 9 years now of having a really deep focus on racial equity through the work that we do.
From your best recollection, Raj, can you recount how you got involved with B Lab and the B Corp community's early inclusion efforts? Sort of what was the context and some of the early conversations that were happening?
Yeah. I went to the B Lab conference in Philly that year where they were changing that rule in North Carolina. I asked Venice to come with me, and Venice went to this thing, and I was like so excited because I was like, oh my God, these are the best people. This is going to be the best thing. And Venice was kind enough to drive with me to Philly from DC and back. And on the way back, we were kind of quiet in the car. And I'm like, so what was that like for you? And she, in a really not in too much of an elaborate way, she basically just helped me to understand how problematic the whole situation was. I had no idea. I was like, this is a group of like well-intending business people that are using business as a force for good to make the world a better place. What are you talking about? And I said, before she got out of the car, would you kindly just write out for me what the problems were? Because I'm going to send it to someone at B Lab. Because I knew people there. We had been a B Corp since 2008. So we sent it over. And, this was really difficult for me because I'm like, oh my God, here I am being critical of this community institution that I feel so strongly about. But they received us with open arms and we got introduced to Jocelyn. And Jocelyn was like, I really want to work with you all to address these issues. And man, God bless Jocelyn Corbett, because that's what she's been doing for the longest time. She still continues to do humble, graceful, insightful. So from there, we started to work on a project with them around helping to do some communications around their inclusive economy challenge. And in the process, we're about to sign the contract. And Ben Anderson goes, oh, by the way, we're about to certify a prison supplier. We're like, what the fuck are you talking about? So luckily, we were in a discussion at that point where I'm like, let me help you with this. This isn't something Venice is going to touch. And we led this stakeholder engagement process with like 30 amazing people, primarily people of color, including people like Angela Glover Blackwell at PolicyLink and a number of other people that I had the opportunity to sit down and discuss this with. And we led this whole process about what would happen to the B Corp movement if we certified a prison supplier, and what would it look like for people like Emmy and me to be at a B Corp conference and someone say, hey, so what do you do? Oh, well,
Right.
I'm in the prison. So wait, what? Because of that, B Lab created a moratorium on certifying prison suppliers. And it was actually one of the first things, and I worked with Dan, who was the head of standards at that time, that I think helped to lead to so much of these other things where what companies are eligible for certification and this complexity that has come up with these multinationals that have all these different companies. So we just slowly just started to become, I would say, a consultant, an activist, and a member of the B Corp community. And it's lasted for almost 8 years at this point. And I'm just so grateful that I get to be in partnership with them, that they trust me. I'm sure I've done some things that have caused harm, both in the community and within the organization. But I still work very closely with them on their climate justice work and on occasion on their racial equity work. And it is the most gratifying work that I do. And I can share why, which we'll get into our conversation about where B Lab is and whether or not they've centered too much on some of this stuff around racial equity and climate justice. And it also might be my bias, but I'm seeing like real progress being made.
Yeah. And I guess on that note, How have you seen B Lab and the B Corp movement evolve since those early days, since you were first starting to work on actively on inclusivity and racial equity?
One time after we got involved, we got to help with the conference in New Orleans. And a member of the B Corp community approached me and said, "This is the most inclusive conference I've ever attended." So it wasn't perfect, but the fact that this person chose to share this with me, they didn't need to, was an aspect of it. We had like affinity rooms, we were having certain discussions. Jess was able to go up and share her experience of what it was like to work at B Lab and the harm that they've experienced there next to a founder of B Corp. Like these discussions were starting to happen and there were spaces being made for people, especially at a business conference. This is not going to happen at a business conference. And there was like this period of time between 2018 and 2020 where we were doing this both at B Lab and at the Social Venture Circle and in other business outlets as well. But this was new, that here's a company, here's a group of people that want to address this issue. And sometimes I say, that's where I first met Ryan also. And, sometimes I say these communities are like microcosms or petri dishes of what's happening in the larger zeitgeist. And what ends up happening is because they're so concentrated, the impact that they have and the potential is like it's almost too much for it to contain. I mean, I've seen communities that have tried to address this stuff and they've completely imploded because they just can't handle it. And the world is like having those conversations like 6-7 years later, but they happened like a decade ago in other communities. But to build on that, they've also dedicated a lot more resources. This used to be something that Jocelyn was doing on the side. And then eventually they were able to bring in a couple of people. Some of those people, had a hard time at B Lab doing that. And now we have Hughes Sydney. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate Hughes's grounded perspective. While that was happening, we were leading some of the work on climate justice. And eventually they hired Kylie. And Kylie's been leading this senior program as a senior program manager, has now been able to hire someone else. So they're putting more and more resources towards this thing that I think is very important.
I agree. There have been significantly more resources, time, effort, energy dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I so appreciate the climate justice lens on top of that, as you referenced.
Yeah, the climate justice work, by the way that worked was we had a champion like Kim Kapunis, and she was leading this group of 50 of the largest B Corps in the world at the time, because that's what it was. It was a global organization that became a US Canada organization. As I kept on sharing her perspective with me, she shared with me that there were no people of color at this gathering on climate. And so I was like, number one, it's in Taos, where there's this beautiful temple that I love to go to. And I'm like, I need to make it somehow into this thing. And Kim got me in there. And my responsibility was to share that people that looked like me were not being represented here. And the following year, Dr. Alonda Green was there, who's now going to become the co-CEO. Venice was there, Jess was there, and a number of other people. And I didn't even have to say as much, but we were able to get that whole group of 50 B Corps to understand why they need to center their climate action and climate justice. And then COVID hit. So that's just another example of what happens, even if people say things aren't happening quick enough or whatever it is. But when you have people in community and there's trust, regardless of whether or not they're quick enough, there is a real opportunity to change hearts and minds. And so I feel like that's often my work. I'm not Black. I have a different experience than Emmy does, and I feel like part of my job sometimes is to be that bridge and to do some of that. Now, sometimes I get tired of it, but I do see the benefit of it.
Well, first, I appreciate hearing that Venice was some of the initial kickoff to this, because it's sort of definitely, it aligns so much with what I know about Venice with her commitment to this. And so I found it really fascinating. Venice Dunn, for folks who don't know, used to work for Provoc with Raj. And I'm not sure where she is now.
She's the vice president of communications at PolicyLink.
Crushing it.
She sounds awesome. I've never met her, but she sounds awesome.
Yeah. And I think the first time I think I met Raj, it was at the Toronto B Corp retreat, when the 3 white founders of B Lab were up on stage. And I took the mic in my self-righteousness. I was like, why are we having 3 white founders on stage right now? Like, what's going on with the B Corp? This is 2017. And I was like, we need to have more representation on the stage. We can't just have, all these white men. And I think I said some other things, but I turned around and Raj was like right there. He's like, thanks, dude. I was like, yeah. I was like, all right. So it was some good initial feedback. And I do wish part of my, it's my journey, and I sort of had a lot of sharp elbows for other white people that I wish, looking back, I feel like was not as productive as it could have been, with a more like bridging John Powell approach. Mine was more like calling out everyone else to make myself feel better approach. But it's been a process to get to where I am. And actually, Venice and some other folks from the B Corp community really helpful with advancing me on my path. And so in terms of the conversations that we've heard, Raj, around where B Lab is now, and I part of the reason I just mentioned my sort of history a little bit was to say that I've fought very hard to get B Lab to where it is today amongst a lot of other people. Like, we've all been pushing to get it to where it is, and the B Corp movement. And so it pains me to talk about some of these critiques, because it feels like, yeah, like Emmy was saying at the top, it's just, we don't want to give airtime to things that we feel like are just being short-sighted or shallow or sort of lazy critiques. But at the same time, it's useful to like not just shy away from them. And so it's a long way of saying there's a concern that the B Corp movement's primarily positioned currently as sort of an anti-racist movement that includes business, instead of like a business for good movement dedicated to transforming the economy that sort of has a JEDI lens component to that. What do you think about that sort of critique, that B Lab has maybe lost some of the business for good messaging that includes JEDI, as opposed to being like anti-racist first, and sort of that argument, Raj?
I mean, like I said, you all got to watch me because I am biased, but I don't see it. I also think that there's enough research and data out there that shows that if you do focus on racial equity or anti-racism, you will unlock billions, trillions from the GDP that will allow for all of us to prosper. And it's really hard to do. Otherwise, it would have been done. I think that in a moment where the economy has been very unsteady for a long time, and people are struggling to find business, including my own business, I think people start to look for different things that may help them explain what's happening, and therefore become critical of things. And these things that we've worked so hard to make at the forefront, they can become nuisances. I continue to struggle with centering racial equity, doing the kind of work that I do as a for-profit company, and the investment that I attempted to make in helping in trying to center that. And I don't think I could have ever put enough money into that process, but I kind of calculated it, and I still have found it very difficult to do. And so I just wonder if that's part of the challenge of the way that we have approached wokeism, is in the way that Ryan described how he was early in his trajectory. And we've done that by shaming and blaming and calling out and canceling people. And not to relay my analysis on the current political environment, I believe what we're experiencing is an approach that did not center belonging and bridging. And as a result, a lot of people feel excluded from the current system and what maybe a business for good, or I don't want to, again, the politic part needs to be clear here about the progressive movement, has not done enough to bring people along. And I know that that's not everybody's work, but I also look at the outcome and result of where we are. And I think that more work needs to be done to bring people along in order for them to see that actually we're all going for the same thing. And it's going to take a lot more patience, and it's going to take a lot more time. And I also know that the world is burning and people's lives are being devastated every single day, and even more so as a result of what's happening with this current administration. But we need to understand the impact of the actions and the approach that we tried to take. That's my opinion from me. Thank you, Emmy.
I really appreciate that point you were making sort of at the top there. There was a lot of economic uncertainty. We experienced a sort of like a little bit of an expansion during the pandemic. The government was injecting a bunch of funds into the economy, and then we experienced a contraction. And honestly, I do feel like a lot of this sentiment was a lot more frequent during that time when folks were, genuinely worried about paying their bills and making their revenue goals and paying their people. And I don't know if I ever, like, obviously it makes sense. Like, people are going to be stressed about it and they're looking, as you said, to explain things as to why they're like not succeeding the way that they would like to be succeeding. But I appreciate you sort of illuminating that. I don't think, made that direct connection before. Yeah, and I would say some argue that B Lab's approach to DEI can sometimes feel performative or focused on language and symbolic gestures rather than tangible, measurable outcomes. I think land acknowledgements has come under scrutiny before. They're really important in reminding folks sort of how we got here and that Indigenous folks are still here, but it can often feel like a box checking exercise. I think there's some frustration that discussions around DEI have become abstract and academic. How would you say can B Corps ensure that their DEI efforts are more focused on outcomes and real world impact rather than performative actions?
I want to start off by saying you just can't win. Let me give you a story. Last year in April, in March, wherever we were, when we did our last Champions Retreat, as part of the CEO Day, myself, Aurora Archer, and Michael Rollins and Bonnie Coberly on my team were asked to lead a session on how CEOs of these larger B Corps or CEOs in general could understand how to best respond to all the things that were coming up. Because they just don't know, right? Every single day, somebody unfortunately is getting murdered or killed. This other thing's happening, this other thing's happening. And they're like, how do I keep up with all this stuff? And so we got into the session, and my friend Bonnie and I have been leading a project on how to center employees in your decision making. Aurora is obviously understands business in a way that I don't, and also understands culture. And Mike Rollins does a lot of work on branding and marketing with companies. So people came to that session, and our role in that session was we're going to teach you how to understand your own inner compass so that you can decide what you respond to. And the criticism was, why didn't we walk away with talking points from that session? And then the second thing is, and that was that was one of the most critical feedback of that CEO thing. And then I felt so bad about that, right? Because I was like, oh, but I want them to like me. I wish I'd given them talking points, but no, you ain't going to get talking points. That's not what we're here for. We're helping you to figure out who you are so that you know what you respond to. And the second thing is that the land acknowledgement component, for me, what it's done is that over time, I've actually been able to better understand the land that I inhabit. I used to get so nervous. Where I'm at, oh, I'm on Anacostan and Piscataway. I had to look it up every single time. But most recently, we did a bunch of sessions where I was leading stuff with some folks from B Lab. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is where I live. This is who was here before me. So I think this idea of performative really comes down to, what are you going to make of it? Are you going to learn from it? Is it going to be something that you can actually like think about it like with every step that you take? Or is it something that you're going to say, oh, I just added pronouns and it's performative, or it's this thing? You know that they wiped out, you're not allowed to use pronouns in the US government anymore? My friend works for the State Department, and he's like, you're not allowed to use pronouns anymore.
That's disturbing.
Yeah. So that's my answer for that. I don't think it's performative. And one other thing is, I recently got to participate in the racial equity and climate justice learning journey. And I am watching people in these intensive experiences, which B Lab offers for free for any of its members, to go through months of training. And I'm watching people having transformative experiences. I'm watching older white men be curious. I'm watching younger Black women participate in spaces that could cause them harm. The quality of the education that comes for free as part of being a B Corp is totally available to people if they want to do it.
I think this is where we who have been doing some of this work, maybe we're just deep in it. And so it's hard to see maybe what others are experiencing. And so if I'm a B Corp from California or like the East Coast or, like Northeast or something, maybe I'm going to be 100% down with speaking about racial equity and like pronouns and land acknowledgments and things like that. Like it's not actually discordant with what I believe. I think the critique can come from other parts of the US where it's like, look, we want to be building this movement as business for good. If we feel like we have to say, my name's Ryan, I use he, him pronouns, I'm coming from Coast Miwok, unceded Coast Miwok land, like we might be losing people like just immediately. And it's not to say that like we shouldn't do it. It's just we interviewed Annie and Haley. And one thing that Annie really helped me see is that it's more about being in relationship with these communities and not just like I say he, him, and then I say I'm on unceded Coast Miwok land, but that's just so I can feel like I'm a good person to like go to the next thing. But I don't really like have any connection to the things I just said. And so how do we bring that more like relational component to this work so that it's less, hey, if you're going to talk at a B Lab event, you have to say your pronouns and do a land acknowledgement. That's the requirement, but there's no like relational component to that. You're just doing it because it feels like we should do that. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that's what performative is. Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what we've been hearing too, is how do we get to the more meat of the work?
I don't know if it's my background, Ryan, or what it is. I have been so lucky and fortunate to participate in different cultures, and each of those different cultures come with their own traditions. And each of those own traditions, we're developing traditions as a community, right? I don't want he, him, his, and the fact that I live on unceded Anacostan land to separate whether or not I can connect with someone else. And then maybe that's because I put relationship above those things. I do hear you that we're losing some people as a result of that. Are we losing people because of what it represents to them and because it's been politicized and therefore it has like this other thing that's happening to them? So it's not even about the thing, it's what they've been told what the thing is.
That's a good question.
Right? Because it means, oh, I'm not welcome here as a non-binary, non-person of color. Right?
And it may dovetail a little bit with more centrist parts of the country that maybe, and this is where the sort of anti-racist part of me is like, well, these people just need to get with it. Like, this is what's happening. Like, just get with it. Like, stop complaining about it. Like, yeah, you're uncomfortable, but like, it's because you're a white dude who's never had to experience that. So I'm sorry. And so then if I'm like the white dude who's said that to, like, hey, I really love the B Corp community, but I went and I felt uncomfortable and I said something and people are like, you just need to, dude, this is what's happening now. Like, you just need to get with it. Is that also the best way of like building a larger coalition? Right.
I don't think that's very compassionate.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that people aren't with doing it, then they're getting shamed and blamed, and then they don't feel welcome, and then they've gone out and voted for Trump.
Right.
Because they're like, well, here I don't get judged. Here I feel like I belong. So, no, it's not important enough for me to lose people.
Yeah.
And that also might be my bias, but yeah. But I wouldn't mind understanding like what about it made them uncomfortable, what we can do to maybe educate them about like these as simple things as pronouns and land acknowledgements and, in a way that helps them to understand.
I think that the scrutiny around wokeness, the recent scrutiny, at least from the American administration, has caused us to think a little bit more deeply about some of these things that we're doing. I think pronouns and land acknowledgements are great examples. And I think we're realizing that every time we are sharing these things, there is an opportunity to help folks understand and to educate and to invite people in. And then maybe we're also just spending a little bit of extra time. It's an invitation and not a requirement type situation. But yeah, I appreciate your saying, like, I don't want to lose those folks, because at the end of the day, that's what it is about, is like, we still want to be inclusive. We need to encourage folks to sit with their discomfort sometimes, but we don't want to shame and blame them. And I think that somewhere in there, we're getting to the crux of what there's something in there where we're getting to the bottom of this sort of, if one could call it a divide of sorts.
Dissonance.
Yeah. Yes.
What's the answer, Raj? Give us the 5-step plan to solving
all of America's problems and the world.
I know that you're asking facetiously, Ryan, but I do think this is where some of the other work that you and I have talked about raising our consciousness and mindfulness practices and developing more compassion through practices that help to cultivate compassion has really been missing from our movement and from our work, or at least I could say that about myself. I wrote this thing the other day that maybe I could share with you that may or may not be relevant. I wrote this the other day and I wanted to add self-righteousness to the mix of confusion between compassion, justice, and self-righteousness, but this is what I wrote. I think there's a confusion between compassion and justice. Just because one may choose compassion doesn't mean I'm giving someone or some atrocity a pass. I'm choosing to be courageous enough to touch into the depths of someone else's pain so that I may do what I can to relieve it. And in doing so, it may have me feel into my own pain, and maybe together we can be courageous enough to experience that shared pain, and maybe from there we can see one another as brothers, and maybe from there, ... Otherwise, we're just the other.
That's powerful.
Could you speak more about what you said about I put relationships first? What does that actually mean to you and look like in your work? Maybe that provides some insights.
Well, my views also don't represent how my people in my company might think about this. With just where I think that where we are as a country and what I see happening, and I see people that are doing public service getting assassinated in their homes, I do not think we're getting what we want. And I would rather find a way to sit down with that gunman and have a discussion with him and understand what's in his heart and understand what troubles him and do what I can to help alleviate his pain so that he does not go out and kill people that have been critical to our movement. That's the best example I can give right now, Ryan, is like, I want to sit down. I have a friend, her name's Philippa Hughes. She does this remarkable work. She has been doing these dinners for the last maybe 9 years. She's a Vietnamese American woman. She gets people from the left and the right to sit down and have dinner. And the conversations that happen and the understanding that happen is completely transformative. Or I have a friend, Josh Kogan, who, similar to what Jay's doing, but in a different way, he has been doing men's work for the last 5 years. He gets men together. We go on like these, like, we either get together on Zoom or do these wilderness trips. And you find that by having these experiences together, people that come from different perspectives in life learn to understand each other and become friends and support each other. So I value that more than I value being right. And I value that more than my pronoun. But that's for me. I'm not a trans person. People don't mistake me often. People often hear my voice and have often called me ma'am on calls. But I don't have that challenge. So I'm not fighting for that, right? In the same way that they are.
Yeah. The thing I grapple with in hearing your story is just the time scales and the horizons for change in a relational first mindset. Seems like it's too long, too much of a duration for like the challenges we face. Shit, we need to fucking do stuff now. Like, I can't be friends with these people. I did a podcast with a guy from Patagonia on their activism team who said he had a quotation from Annie Leonard from Greenpeace who said, like, most people get in this work and they think it's a sprint, but it's not a sprint. The second thing they think is it's a marathon. She's like, it's not a marathon. What they realize is that it's a relay race. You're just doing the work, but you're preparing the baton for the next person to like keep it going because you're not going to finish it. And I think that's like an apt metaphor for how long these things take, but it does feel like in my body, it feels like the right approach, even if it feels like it's too, the fear part of me feels like it's too short. There's not enough time.
Yeah, and that's good. And you should feel that way. And at the same time, it is a relay. I cannot tell you what's been happening to me as I approach 50 this year. I used to want to be in these rooms and want to do all the thing. Nowadays, when other people show up that have either similar or more likely better skills than me, man, I'm like, thank God you're here because I'm going to go. And it's like before my ego wanted to be there. I wanted
Yeah.
to be there. I need to be there because that's who I was and that's how I
Mhm.
proved my worth. Now I'm like, oh, thank God. I can finally go. Have a nice day. That does not come when you're younger, I think, unless you like unless you really go to the humility real early. Oof.
I feel it. Someone else is here to solve the problem.
And I trust them.
Right.
They're probably going to do a better job than me.
Exactly.
But Ryan, how does that last part relay into
Mm.
this critique of how the B Lab movement may have become too woke?
I just think that for me, I'm speaking for myself, a lot of my own anti-racist actions and ideology and approach has been, how do I get this right and be seen as doing the right thing? And of course, make change, but it's mostly been like, I'm scared to do the wrong thing. It's been less of a relational, like, how do I actually build a relationship with this community beyond showing up there and picketing one day and then leaving and then never? It's like, how do I actually build that like durable, having dinner, like calling somebody, making it actually a bond as opposed to these transactional sort of anti-racism, more performative things, honestly. I guess what I'm hoping is in the B Corp world, maybe there's a way to bring that relational first approach more to like these conversations and like the ways that we think about it in the community. Because I think it'll be more meaningful, it'll be less performative, will actually have bigger impact.
I'll just add that I think there's a interesting through line through all of these conversations that it's the softer skills. It's less like there's a lot of education about like real terms and real approaches and frameworks and stuff. And what we're really trying to do is change hearts and minds. And to change hearts and minds, we are supposed to be leveraging more of a relational strategy. And we're supposed to be really working on those softer skills. We're supposed to be working on ourselves. I appreciate the meditative practices that gets incorporated into a lot of this work. But yeah, I think it's worth noting that we are working on changing hearts and minds, and that is, yeah, a much longer time horizon for sure.
I was going to say, I mean, you had made your point in a beautiful way.
Appreciate it.
The other thing that we could do is talk to people like Spring Washam and Lama Rod Owens and just have a huge ayahuasca ceremony at the next Champions Retreat, along with the mindfulness stuff, and we could accelerate it a little bit, but that's about it.
I'm fully for that.
Karen, you heard it here first.
I'm psilocybin.
Madison 2026.
Milwaukee.
Oh, yeah. Milwaukee. Sorry.
My wife's from Milwaukee. We can make that shit happen.
I love it. Raj, what gives you hope right now about where this movement is headed?
I don't know, y'all. I love this conversation with you all. Thank you for letting me share. So that gives me hope that you all care enough to want to do this. Right? This is not an act of like, go fuck yourself, B Lab. This is an act of like, yo, here's an opportunity for us to think a different way or to think about widening the aperture or how people think about what's happening. Like I said, I just get to do this work with so many B Corps and within B Lab, and I'm watching transformation happen at a much slower pace than I expected. That point, Ryan, I think as I get older, I understand that these things take time. If I think that my first discussion with B Lab about this stuff was like 8 or 9 years ago, and here's where we are now. Oh, okay, this is how it happens.
One question we also ask, Raj, is what do you need right now? And how can the listeners support your work?
We're in a position right now where we need some more work around brand strategy, messaging, communications, and campaigns. If it comes in, it'll be lovely. If not, we'll continue to adjust and make changes as we need to, commensurate with our financial reality. I'd love for any of these folks that are wondering about this to take advantage of the fact that B Lab is providing these trainings for folks for free and to take them. B Lab's going through leadership change. A whole bunch of different things are going to be happening at B Lab for the next 6 months, along with the standards. There's more things that I think will be announced about what that whole thing looks like and what are the forums and opportunities that we need to be able to share these insights. Because at the end of the day, I think that the feedback that you're hearing is that people care about the movement. They've put tremendous amount of their life force energy into this work, and they're concerned that maybe it was all for naught. That's really sad when you put in tons of volunteer time, when you could be spending time on your business or on your family, and find out things aren't going the way that you want them to. So we got to make sure that our voice is heard.
And where can folks go to find more about your work? I don't know if you want to mention any of the reports that you worked on for B Corps, and then maybe like the Provoc socials or website or things like that.
Yeah, any other report? Yeah. So one is the Climate Justice Playbook for Business, and you can go onto the B Lab US and Canada website, which we got to design. There's also the Principles for Partnership, and I could also send you these URLs, and then you can include them in the notes for the podcast. So those are two things that I think are really going to be awesome. And then we're about to launch in a couple of months. We'll have a self-guided tutorial on how B Corps can shift their banking, insurance, and 401k to climate-friendly banks. So even if you didn't get to participate, we're going to have like you're basically an on-demand thing that you can look at on your own. And also, I want to see some proposals for Champions Retreat next year that talk about this in a way that engages the community. Maybe y'all can do like a live podcast with a whole group of people talking about this. But yeah, let's talk about this as a community and figure out how we're going to address it.
I love it.
And then as far as Provoc goes, yeah, provoc.me, and happy to talk about whatever. You can send me an email at raj@provoc.me.
Cool. Raj, thank you so much for joining us. I just feel like you and your work is such an embodiment of the love and care and compassion that we so often find in the B Corp community. I really appreciate you digging into such a topic with us. It has been so lovely to chat with you today.
Thank you.
Hey, Beyond the Bee listeners. If you're looking for even more inspiring conversations with leaders on the front lines of our movement towards just futures, be sure to subscribe to Next Economy Now, produced by the team at Lift Economy. Next Economy Now broadens the focus beyond the B Corp movement to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, equitable, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Check out our latest episodes at lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can subscribe to Next Economy Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.